Hello, everybody. I am Lucy McBride. We've met before. Welcome to Facebook Live. Today is Friday, the 31st of July, the last day of July. And with me today, I'm so excited. I have Dr. Hina Talib, who is an adolescent medicine specialist, pediatrician, mother, and generally awesome person who is joining us today to talk about adolescent health and the pandemic. What are teens really feeling? How are they faring? What can we do to help understand the emotional lives and the physical health of our teenagers and how to help them prepare for the unknowns? And she's coming to us from New York City, which is awesome. So thank you so much for coming today. I'm really, really glad you're here. It feels like the perfect time to be talking about adolescence on a Friday night when normally they'd be, running from the school hallways into a fun afternoon, and we have a totally different landscape in our country right now.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Lucy, for having me, and it's been a pleasure chatting with you kind of offline. And I'm thrilled to count you as a new colleague and friend, and that's just kind of this weird new power of social media in that sort of a silver lining, I guess, of this hard time. I always love to talk about adolescent health and medicine. It's always on my mind, but boy, this pandemic has really kind of uncovered and put like an underscore on so many rich adolescent health and medicine topics, because it affects pretty much every level of their identity development, which is a huge part of adolescent as they kind of progress through early, middle, and late adolescence. And so, everywhere from tweens to young adults, I feel like every part of their world, their work really is school. Like that is their kind of their jobs, and their structure came from that. Heck, a lot of them actually got their mental health from school, like more up to a third did, and college. Even more college age kiddos get their kind of mental health work at school. And so to take a lot of this away has been, a road bump. And I know you and I have been talking about, from the parent side, how we've been just like waiting to hear about fall and about school. And it's been like a lot of anticipation, a lot of pins and needles. And I know you had an update from DC. Do you want to share that now?
Yeah, so I don't need to tell many of my viewers here, but yesterday was an announcement from Mayor Bowser that DC public schools are going all virtual until November 6th. It wasn't shocking given that Montgomery County and Fairfax County and the neighboring counties had gone virtual, but it's still a blow. And I think, adults, adolescents, human beings in general, like it's natural for us to have, hope and hold on to hope, even when we know it's not necessarily possible. It's also normal to kind of now grieve the loss of a reality that you thought might happen, even if it wasn't seemingly feasible. And so I think a lot of people right now are kind of bracing themselves, gathering themselves. Maybe they're not even there yet, and maybe they're in the fetal position, trying to figure out like, okay, what is this going to look like for my life? What is it going to look like for my kid? I think from a adult standpoint, like you and I both, and like everybody on this planet, we had that sort of hair on fire feeling in March, and you in particular, because Dr. Talib was deployed to work in a COVID unit for adults, even though she's a pediatrician and an adolescent medicine specialist. Right. And that was a crazy time. And then we kind of thought, okay, let's get our act together, let's get our routines together, let's figure out how to parent these kids and get through school. And then we thought maybe we'd have a little reprieve in the summer, and bam, we don't have a reprieve. So it's a big adjustment at this moment in DC and around the world.
Right. I mean, the headlines kind of follow our national mood. Sometimes they're pretty inflammatory, but I do think that they've captured kind of the angst of our initial response of what do we do in the moment, and we kind of all banded together to figure it out. We just have to make it through summer. And then summer, we thought maybe there would be camp, and maybe think there would be reprieve there. And then in the summer, now we're thinking, maybe, hopefully, we're going to figure out something in the fall. And so at every level, it's been a lot of uncertainty for us as parents. And this is all this, it gets transmitted to our kids, whether they're toddlers or whether they're teens. They listen, they take their lead from us. And it's really hard because we're going, we had this idea of their high school years, of, activities, of certain milestones. And they did too, but we did too. And I think that it's so, I think we do need to process it ourselves and filter it a little bit. You use the word grieve, and I think that that's something that I hear from my adolescents and young adults so much. It's true grief. Sometimes we think of grief in young adults and in teens more in terms of if they lose somebody. And unfortunately, for a lot of teens, they did lose somebody related to them, in their worlds from COVID-19. Or we think of it as changes in the family structure, like a divorce. You think about a lot of grief counseling, but I have not seen this amount of grief in teens kind of collectively, it really highlights kind of thinking through, validating, empathizing their grief, because it's a loss. It's something that it's, we can make it different. We can maybe make it better. We can make it creative. We can make it memorable, something that we'll talk about for decades to come, this time that you had it, during this pandemic. But we're never going to give back what they had. It's a true, true loss.
I think that's right. And I think, as you said, it's so important to validate those feelings. Sometimes with my teens, I've got 3 of them, I will validate their feelings and they're annoyed that I'm validating them. I'll say, like, look, I know you're feeling stressed, or I'll sort of like try to kind of help them find the words and say, I know you're feeling stressed. This is a loss. Like, my son lost his high school, second semester of spring and graduation celebration. And, I think part of what I do, and maybe I go too far sometimes, is try to validate it before they've even said it.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think validating their feelings, and as you and I both know from the literature in the world of trauma, you can't really compare grief across trauma. There's no sort of, like, as someone said to me, the suffering Olympics. There's no like winner of the suffering Olympics. It's not like you get to grieve more if you lost someone on a ventilator in ICU, and you don't get to grieve if you simply lost your friendships and your soccer team or your baseball team in the spring.
Right.
There's enough grief to go around, if you will. It's everybody has their own unique relationship to the parts of their life they've lost, and those are valid feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's very, beautifully put. And I think that plays because as parents, we want to fix, and it's just our natural kind of urge to just solve the problem and fix. And, one of the big things that I think teens are missing out from school and the process of kind of being around their peers and developing those relationships are their sort of independence skills. And so as much as we can help them problem solve and not fix, and encourage them to pick up the phone and make phone calls that are needed, like for doctor's appointments, or to figure out, stuff with school, if it's a college, as much as we can have, if they need to speak to a professor about some, project, as much as we can be there and help and let them make those phone calls or let them send those emails and not fix, and just get them on board with kind of, well, what do you think is the next step, is great, because I feel like having them come back into our homes, many people have had older adolescents or young adults, college age kiddos back in their home, and that's been hard for a lot of people for different reasons. But, kids sometimes, regress when they're at home. And so it's important to have them do the same things that they were doing in college or outside. If they were living, in an apartment somewhere else, if they were doing their own laundry before, they should be doing their own laundry now. If they were making meals for themselves, they should be making meals for themselves now. So it's sort of a mindset shift of having them physically back in your space. But whatever we do to kind of reinforce them and have them practice independent skills, even though they're physically in our spaces, is helpful. But this pandemic has really affected so much of their worlds.
I mean, aside from grief, which of course is pervasive and, can touch different parts of our emotional life. It can make us feel anxious. It can make us feel depressed. It can make us feel like turning to alcohol, marijuana, binge eating. Like, what are some other themes you're seeing in adolescents, sort of across the board, in terms of how they feel emotionally? Yeah.
I mean, so there have been a handful of surveys that have been sent out through sort of like mental health nonprofits like Active Minds, Healthy Minds, Common Sense Media, and SurveyMonkey did a joint survey. And these were all done kind of March, April, May, and they were in younger adolescents and then also in the college age kiddos. And so we learned a little bit from these surveys. They weren't like studies where they made comparisons, but they were rich, and they provided us information that kids are feeling the pandemic. They're worried. I thought, so anxiety is one that comes up across all those age groups as sort of the main thing that people describe that they feel more of. And then after that, depression. And the anxiety part, some of these studies looked, or some of these surveys looked at just sort of you talking about you feeling more anxious, not that you having an anxiety disorder that's new or that you have depression. There are a couple of studies, a few that have come out of China that they surveyed adolescents and young adults, and they actually looked for how we clinically describe anxiety and depression. And yes, they found that those things increased. And so we know for a fact that anxiety and depression have increased in these age groups and we've talked about it. One thing I like to remind people is that it's normal to worry and have these worries, and it's normal to adjust and take some time to adjust to our new normals. And it doesn't always mean that they have an anxiety disorder or depression. And sometimes that validation piece, which I know you kind of lead with, which is great, it's really powerful, and it can really dissipate worry, normal worry. And so I do think there's just a sea of normal worry right now that that's for some people, for most kids, I think is getting validated, because I think that, we've kind of collectively learned that we need to listen and actively listen, and we need to validate, but not every kiddo is getting that opportunity. So that's my number one thing is differentiating normal worry versus when it's like anxiety and depression.
And would you agree that that sometimes parents need help with themselves, or help, through an adolescent therapist or, a pediatrician, to help them sort out with their child what is normal worry and what is sort of out of proportion to what's going on and causing interferences with sleep or eating or, health in some way. And so, as you have beautifully done on your social media platform, encourage people to try to identify what's going on, validate your kid's feeling, but also not be afraid to ask for help, and to ask the question to your pediatrician, because pediatricians, like you, are armed with like a whole arsenal of skills about mental health. Like, just like I consider, like you do, that mental health is relevant to physical health. It belongs in the doctor's office.
Yes.
And so it's fair game to talk about with your doctor these kind of issues.
Especially with telehealth, like telehealth existed for mental health, way before it existed for, as to the degree that it is now,
right,
for a medical visit, and so we know that it actually works, and we know that it works in adolescents and young adults. It's been studied. It's a good modality for that, and pediatricians are at the ready to talk to you about your teens and your tweens, your teens, and your young adults' mental health. Our professional societies have been doling out resources for us to lean on, and our networks of who we can suggest for therapy referrals is blossoming right now. So because this is the need, right? And so I really, really do encourage families, if you have a question, if you think, okay, this is feeling a little bit imbalanced, it's a little bit too much. If I always trust a parent's instinct, as now I'm a parent myself, the only regrets I've ever had in parenting is when I've gone against my own instinct. And so if you feel like there's something off, just, please bring it up, and we will have our confidential, private, alone time. We will be creative and ask you to leave the room. We will speak to them in the bathroom behind a closed door if we need to. But we use our private, confidential time to help address, all of these sorts of mental health questions and other things that may or may not be impacting it. Other themes, Lucy, you asking about themes. Oh my gosh, there's so much. There's more time with the internet, which
yes,
has been, and social media, which has been and those early surveys from the pandemic really said that youth were using it as a way to connect with their peers and their teachers and their schools and their extended families, and so it really seemed to be a positive, and we were in crisis mode, and my kind of what I had said on my platform was relax our kind of rules and our expectations. We are literally in a new crisis, and lean into what feels good and right, and if it feels good and right to be on FaceTime or to game in a more than they were before, right? At that in March, April, I just was saying, let's relax it a little bit.
I love hearing you say that, because I think a lot of people, myself included, were like, oh my God, this is so much screen time. And, is my kid's brain gonna rot out of his head, but it is the way they communicate. And then,
Yeah.
to take that away would be even more isolating. At the same time, there's a relationship with screens that can be tricky for some kids, right?
Absolutely. And so it's more the quality of what they're doing, and less this, like you do with toddlers, like, oh, they have to be off of, it has to be max an hour, max 2 hours. It's really, I think more, how is it making them feel? Is it making them feel supported and connected, or is it making them feel more lonely because they're just, is it 2-way or 3 or multiple way where they're chatting and interacting with people, or are they just sort of doing that doom scroll where it's just sort of like a, one-way kind of scrolling, and then maybe the images that they're taking in don't make them feel good about themselves.
Right. I hadn't heard that doom scroll.
Mm-hmm. Yes. As an adolescent doc, I get to, one benefit is that they keep me on trend. And so I do know.
So doom scrolling, tell me what it is. I think I know. It's just sort of like looking at what your friends are doing and like what you're missing out on, and that sort of like.
So scrolling is kind of when you're just mindlessly going, and it's mindless, and it sucks time, because an hour later you realize you've just been looking through your feed on whatever platform.
I do that, right?
Me too.
But doom scrolling is what?
So when you're looking specifically at COVID-19 or pandemic related news updates, which for some people, earlier in the pandemic, you probably heard as parents, like, we have to limit this. Like, we have to find a time and place in our days to worry. So it's our designated worry time and our designated news intake time, and then figure out where we want to get the news from. Because if there's, if we're just getting these headlines that are flashy, and then you have to sit there and sift through as we do as physicians, we sort of are like, well, I need the study that they're talking about here, because I don't understand what they're saying, because it's so inflammatory or it seems so outrageous. And then it's hard to find the study, and then you find the study and you're like, well, they didn't actually report on everything that we need to know to make sense of this study. So it's been a really hard time, I think, for us as physician moms, especially, to kind of sift through the media. But for everybody else who just takes that headline and maybe doesn't have the bandwidth to find the study and look at it, it can be really distressing. And so, I think, and some of these surveys actually found that young adults are now looking at reputable sources and not the news media anymore, just as we, I think, had talked about in the beginning, that we should be doing as grownups too, is just stick to a few reputable sources, limit the time of day that you kind of check in with the news, because it is designed to be anxiety provoking, and we're already in crisis. And so limiting some of that is super important. And doom scrolling is sort of just in this loop of reading all the inflammatory kind of articles that are out there.
So what would you have as advice? What would you say to a parent who said, Dr. Talib, my child seems withdrawn and down and sort of not himself, but I can't quite access him, and the more I try to access him and knock on his door, and I can't do it. Like, what is your advice to parents who are trying to kind of break in? They want to validate those feelings, they want to have those conversations, but they can't access. Like, how do you break through the firewall of adolescence?
So I don't have adolescence myself.
It's okay. You know a lot about adolescents, yes, regardless.
But yeah. I have spent a decade speaking with them every day, and it's not uncommon that I have an adolescent who doesn't want to speak up, who doesn't want to open up. So I've encountered this many, many times. I think general principles are meeting them where they're at and finding the moments. So the moments, it may, in medicine, we often do this thing called having a family meeting. And we do this when things get hot and heavy in hospitals, and so having these family meetings is something that I had talked about on my platform earlier on, just having a check-in time. And it sounds formal, but it doesn't have to be formal. It could be when you're all in the car and you go for a drive. It could be when you're all playing a game. Hey, we're all together. quick check-in, guys. These are the things that are on my mind. These are the things that needed to get done for the house that I need your help with. What are your issues, and how can we, problem solve them? How can we be there for you more? What do you need? What do I need? Sort of like as a team thing, and as a check-in. And I think that was in the beginning, and now it's just the need for having kind of a time where you do check in. So it's not something that you can hold on to something and kind of look forward to. A lot of people like to incorporate fun things like gratitude practices in this check-in. So one thing that you did this week that I loved and I appreciated so much, and thank you for that. And we sometimes don't say thank you in the moment. We just are just so busy getting through our days. And so kind of being mindful about giving them props for what they are doing, that's helpful. So finding the moment, which could be, it's particular to you and your family, of when you guys feel like talking kind of happens. And then meeting them where they're at. So, if they're playing a video game and they love it, try playing it with them. They'll laugh.
Yeah, no, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I sat down with my son. I'm like, tell me about this game.
Yeah.
Of course, I'm thinking this looks so mind-numbingly boring, but like he's so into it. And I'm like, okay, tell me about it. Let's like, what are those little like? He's like, Mom, oh my gosh, it's not a car, it's a, but it is, like why not if you just join them.
Yeah, I mean,
even for like a second.
When we want to connect, right, with people in our lives or our partners, we want them to show an interest in what we're interested in. So if you can't find a way, and a principle is just where are their eyes, where are their interests, and see if you can kind of meet them in their kind of in show interest in what they're interested in, and kind of talk about that.
I think it's a great point. There's always also the car, right? It's like the car. I mean, I remember when I was growing up, my mom would always, we get in the car, seatbelt on, and you're like, oh geez, here it comes. But I couldn't run away, and even if I wasn't like listening, I was still hearing the words, and it was being absorbed. So the car is a wonderful place.
A last thing that I think some people that I've heard some parents say has been helpful is writing. I've heard people have like a shared journal or a family journal where people can write whatever they want in there, or writing emails to each other, even though you're living in the same space. I know it sounds crazy, but sometimes a teen that isn't, teens who are really perfectionists, and there are many different reasons why teens may not want to just have a big discussion with you about all their big feelings. It's hard, and it adds another thing that they have to do. A lot of teens and young adults are saying that they're wearing a mask right now. They're wearing this mask of I have it together, or I'm okay, and they share this with us in confidence. And it's so. I feel for them, because I think a lot of people are doing this right now. A lot of people are wearing this mask of we're just going to get through this, we're okay, and don't always want to let on when you're not okay and when you need help. So kind of modeling for them that asking for help is more than okay. It's actually a sign of strength. And the best way to do that, I think, is to share what we're going through, what our difficulties are, and then what our coping skills are. And so, not I'm going to go for a run, I need time away, like I need my time. I'm going to go for a run because it stretches my body out, it clears my head, it's going to make me feel great, I'm going to come back really recharged. And so it's just sort of like talking out loud about what you're doing and why you're doing it and why it's a priority for you, kind of modeling.
So good. It's so good. I think that's right, because even though, certainly we both know that kids can have anxiety or depression that's independent of, parental issues. Right now we're under such close quarters, and they are literally absorbing our energy all the time.
Yeah.
Which can put pressure on parents to think, oh geez, now I'm being watched like a hawk, I better be, have my act together. But some of the having your act together involve just being authentic and being real. It doesn't mean you have to now be the perfect parent. It means you just have to be honest with yourself, and then honest with your kid about, in a developmentally appropriate way about, what's going on. Because I think it's a lot for us to ask ourselves as adults to have it all figured out.
Right.
And then if you can explain to your kid who's feeling the same way that like, hey, mom's trying to do the best she can, here are the issues I'm dealing with, here's the way I'm trying to work on it. And like, by the way, it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah. I think this idea of protecting our kids, we take too far. And I know that you and I had chatted before about sort of where's the hope here, and is it all like, is this all sort of heavy and negative in terms of my outlook or our outlook for our youth? And I truly think that this is a setup to model resilience and practice and build and foster resilience in our youth, because all of the sort of the tools, the stepping stones of building a resilient kid are all around us right now. So, so helping others, if you can have an outward focus and if you can help others, and the simple act of wearing a mask, feeds into that. And so, and whatever you can do for your community, for the elders around you, for all that, that plus the modeling of asking of help for yourself. So I'm going to speak to a parent coach, or I'm going to speak parent coach, a business that is booming right now. So, there's resources out there if you want to be coached through, or if you need some help for yourself on how to approach your teenager, which sometimes is a more palatable way to go at it than telling your teen that they need to see a therapist. You can see one first, and parenting is a relationship, and it's a two-way street. And sometimes I think in our worry, we just want to compartmentalize it as it's their problem that they're not engaging with me right now. And sometimes, that's not always the case. It's a relationship, and it can be a problem that you can come at it two ways. Circling back to, how do you reach a teen that isn't there to be reached? To really kind of help yourself and take that time for yourself. But yeah, I think that, so we talked about like grief, anxiety, depression. I've seen a resurgence of eating disorders. This has been a very weird time where kiddos are, again, out of their normal coping mechanisms of eating in different places. Now it's just in the home, and all this like face-to-face screen time for people who have body image issues hasn't been helpful, and has been triggering, and the panic buying that we were doing, like it was unsurprising that teens are who had previous eating disorders are having flare-ups, and new ones are presenting. And so these are all real things that we're definitely seeing, and we're taking care of, and we're on the lookout for. But on the flip side, I have seen wonderful stories and heard wonderful stories, and have been witness to just amazing things that teens are doing. They've become the tech guru, the tech support for the family. They're leading the way with some of the problem solving of like, how are we going to move going forward, and coming up with interesting like vacation, like RV or camping in the backyard, like just coming up with things that we can do as a family that are fun and different and safe at the same time.
Yeah, and then also just like everyone's going to have a different reaction to the pandemic, and some kids are simply not going to do well because of their home situation, or pre-existing emotional issues, or there's so many kids we know that are struggling. But I do think, as you said, like for example, I'm seeing a number of adolescents who I see as patients benefit from more sleep and less busy overstructured schedules. Like the pandemic almost gave them permission to have a more kind of organic existence in the world. We are so used to living in these like rush, go busy times that I think there's some kids who are benefiting from having a little more elbow room. There's a little more time to kind of contemplate what's in between your ears, as opposed to being scheduled and programmed all the time. So yeah, as you were saying, I think there is hope, and there's opportunity if you look for it. Unfortunately, not for every kid. It depends on the kid, depends on the opportunities that are even available to them. But I think if you look for it, just like you and I look for hope when you can in the global sense of the pandemic, it's out there, and kids can benefit from, as you said, having these trying times and learning how to pick themselves up and ask for help and move forward.
And I work in an underserved population, and I will say that I see resilience in the kids that I work with to amazing degrees. Even though they may not have all the resources or all the pods available to them or whatnot, sometimes this amount of suffering, collective suffering, I have seen families pull together. And in some of those early surveys where they looked at how kids and teens and young adults were doing, so many of them said, what makes me feel better, or where I draw strength, is time with my family, and more just time with my family hanging out. Not the remote education. I think that added some stress for them for sure. But just hangout time with their families is something
Yeah.
that said was protective, which I thought was great.
Yeah, like in other words, I think it doesn't have to be all bad. I was talking to Kelly Fraden on a different Facebook Live like last week about, we don't have to assume the worst. Like there are opportunities, there's the birthplace of resilience is struggle and hardship. And we don't wish upon our kids hardship and struggle, but let's face it, this is the unpleasant reality we're in. And so it can be, you know, the birthplace of growth and gathering of those tools that are going to really serve you well through life. I mean,
Right.
I think you would agree. Like the things that have gotten me through the hardest times of my life are not like things that I learned in a classroom, really, right? It's like the things that you struggled with and wrestled with and failed at. And there's so much literature out there about, failure is the key to success. And, it's all great and good in theory. And then until like, you don't want to have a failure for your kid. You want to protect them from failure. But this is a unique time for kids to very carefully and subconsciously gather that arsenal of tools that will get them through life.
Right. I think that we had that short-term crisis in the beginning when spring kind of fell apart, and then the summer was sort of like, okay, but it's summer. And then I think in the last few weeks, all my parent friends, like we just sort of settled into this, okay, this is a long haul. Like
Yeah.
this is going to be this long haul crisis. We don't know 1 year, 2 years, a lot of people debating about that. Vaccine, no vaccine, vaccine not in time, so much debate around that. Fall, school or not school, college or not college. But I think if you could think of it even longer haul than that, like mega.
Yeah.
If you step back and zoom out, because we were fixated on these like spring, summer, and then fall, but potentially, 5 years from now, what will we have learned from this, and where will we be, and how can we how can we help our teens and our young adults kind of get to where they need to be, and how big of a deal will it be to have a gap year or to have this year be different, or 2 years be different? It sounds nuts in the moment. But perhaps zooming out a bit, it will lead to maybe some I think it will lead to some strengths and some work that would not have happened before because we were just scheduled with their.
You gave me such hope when we were talking before we went live here about how New York is doing and how New Yorkers are no stranger to trauma, right? You guys, it goes without saying. I mean, first of all, the horror that you went through in the beginning of the pandemic. Right. But what's amazing, Hina, is to hear how the spirit in New York is one of resilience and like sort of shared hope, because you have crushed the curve. And it's possible, and that is also something I try to remind my patients, that like as hopeless as it feels, and it feels like this wilderness of desolate misery, we do have power. We do have the ability. We know what works to crush the virus. We absolutely do. We just have to do it, and we have to do it together, and we have to keep doing it, and wake up and do it again and do it again, and it works. And we've seen it work. And New York is living, breathing proof.
I totally, I think that it's something that gets me through my days. At the beginning of this epidemic, because New York was and the Bronx where I worked was an early epicenter, all eyes were on us with horror, and I was living through that horror, and it was very, very, very hard. But the city banded together. The leadership of the city had our backs in terms of the citizens and in terms of the essential workers and the frontliners and all the different capacities trying to help. And if we didn't shut down, if we weren't strict about things, we wouldn't have flattened our curve. And we didn't know, even as medical providers at that time, if it would work. Like I remember thinking, I don't. This seems like it's just out of hand. I don't even know if people are going to A, listen to the rules, and B, if it's going to work. And it did. People did listen. New York did. And it did work. Our curve, we faced the peak. We went down from the peak. Our numbers are steady. And it's because of this continued, deliberate, slow opening that is based on science. And it gives me so much hope, because God forbid it happens again. At least we know what to do. And then, you know, the reality is that it is happening again, and it's happening again all over. And I actually have to limit my news intake of it because it disturbs me so much, because it reminds me of like what I saw. And I just, you know, I wish people were able to do what we did, although I know that it's complicated, and there's a cost to shutting down, and there's a cost to, you know, being strict about masking and distancing and stuff, but it worked. And
it worked. And so for anyone wondering, is there hope out there? I mean, imagine the feeling that you, Hina, are feeling when you're walking around outside in New York City and people, strangers, are looking at you over your mask and knowing with those eyes that like, we did it. And it works. Science works. The facts don't lie. It works. We have the power. We have the tools. We just have to do it.
Right. And I think that's very hopeful.
It's hopeful. And I think it's also important, as you were saying earlier, to explain to our kids that like, this is going to be over. There is hope. We have to keep pushing. We have to keep fighting and pushing. And those are good lessons to learn, right? But I'm so grateful that you joined us. I really think you bring such important and valuable information to the world of COVID and just in general. And everybody who's watching should follow Dr. Talib on Instagram. You're mostly on Instagram. It's Teen Health Doc. So it's at Teen Health Doc. And I love your graphics. I love your messages. She's super smart, obviously a lovely, lovely person and a mother. And so it's fun to collaborate. It is one of the silver linings for me is reconnecting with my medical school friends from Boston and my residency friends from Baltimore, and then having this new group of friends who, you know, together we're trying to help connect people with science and fact and what we're seeing in real time, because it doesn't have to be this sort of medicine and science doesn't have to be this sort of other world and other people are living here. We're trying to kind of merge those worlds and bring it to you guys, because actually that's part of my mental health, is thinking that I can, you know, reach somebody who doesn't have a doctor or reach somebody who doesn't understand mental health and its relevance. And so it's cool when I meet somebody who's doing the same thing and we've actually never even met in person.
No, and it's so wonderful to meet someone like you, Lucy, who shares all these sort of feelings, and also this is helping us. It helps us to share this.
It helps me so much. It gives me hope. It gives me joy, and it gives me like connection is part of the way the world works. And so I wouldn't have met you if it hadn't been the pandemic. So
right, I joined
number one
that I'm like an adolescent on social media. I joined recently, and I am here to connect just like they are.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I hope you have a quiet weekend. I hope you get some rest, some downtime, and I'll talk to you next time. Maybe we'll meet on your Instagram next week or something like that.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk about. Okay. Take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.